Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the world of Arcanum, of Steamworks and Magic Obscura. This is an appendix episode. It's not necessary to the full playthrough. I'm doing it because I want to, but if you aren't interested in listening to the deep lore of Arcanum, or you just don't want to essentially sit around and have me read to you for half an hour or however long it takes, please feel free to skip on to the next chapter. Or, if you're listening to this live, then hold tight. On Monday, we'll actually be getting on with the main plot. I know it's hard to believe. I'm a little bit shocked too. Don't worry, I'm sure we'll deviate again soon enough. Now, I do these chapters because, one, you can skip through them, as I say, if you're not terribly interested. Two, they take some time, so I don't necessarily want to include them in a main chapter. And three, I love the books in this game. I'm an unapologetic lore nerd. I love the deep backstories and the histories you get in games like these. So when I play these games, I always end up sitting around in the libraries and reading books for ages, which is exactly what we're going to do. As you can see, Garfield's here, Virgil, Magnus, even Jaina is hanging out reading some books on herbology. The librarian is incredibly pissed off that we're here. She's not one for the character, so to speak, of our party, but you know what? Yeah, she can go suck a cigar. So, let's start with the publicly available books. Question. Volume 1. What do we... The Pagan Gods of Arcanum. Actually, whilst we're here, we might as well read the book that the Professor of Religion gave us. The Pagan Gods of Arcanum by Aldous T. Buxington III. The following is a brief description of the pagan religious figures of Arcanum. Most, with a few exceptions, have been forgotten and lost to antiquity. It is this author's opinion that the old gods do indeed have power, and are not at all to be disavowed. The Lesser Gods. There is a lesser god for every race in Arcanum. I have classified them into three categories: the noble lesser gods, the lesser gods, and the darker lesser gods. The noble lesser gods. Well, the one god of wisdom. Before the advent of existentialism, mostly mystics who worshipped natural deities. The most powerful of these deities was Terrell, god of the trees, who later came to embody wisdom. Terrell was both blind and mute, and could only speak through the wind or the rain. Offerings to Terrell were the small wooden statues known as litani, or houses of the soul. Year by elven shamans, were said to hold the spiritual essence of the owner. Every year, litani were offered to Terrell. Offerings to Terrell believed to increase both intelligence and insight. Geshtiana, human goddess of love. Geshtiana, I suppose I think it's Gesh, yes. That's just a mistype. Geshtiana has been a central figure in human paganism for as long as their history has been recorded. Human mythology claims that Geshtiana was once a mortal woman, so beautiful that she was made into a god by the moon and the sun. Humans believe that down upon them at twilight, and that her love was manifested in the springtime. The festivals to the goddess were a time of celebration, as well as the various rites of physicality and fertility. Offerings at the altars of Geshtiana were usually passion fruit, which was believed to bring with her increased beauty and charisma. The neutral lesser gods. Albric, stone dwarves. The ancient god Albric has always weighed heavily in dwarven lore. In the oldest dwarven myths, it is upon the spine of Albric. It is upon the spine of Albric on which Arcanum rests. That seems to be a bit of a mistype. And the dwarves are his first privilege to live within him. Albric is the most ancient of things, and loves those who are slow to anger, deep of thought, and hard-working. To the altars of Alaric, dwarves bring chunks of lava rock. To them it represents his anger, which can be terrible, but which is cool and light when all is well with his children. Dwarves believe these offerings bring them increased strength. Makar, the Bedakan god of the hunt. Very little is known of the lizard-like nomadic Bedakan. The following is an excerpt from Fauna and Species of the Dark Fens, or possibly Spawna and Species of the Darke Fens, by the famous gnomish explorer Sir Warren Purrington. They have language and the most elementary beginnings of culture, but that seem altogether wild and ferocious. Their simple religion revolves around deities they call the Snake Fathers, one of whom is a being named Makar, the hunt. Before their daily outings to find food, Bedokan warriors kneel before the altar of Makar and offer small pieces of something they call stone, which looks to be some form of rough diamond or crystal. Where they get Bedakan warriors believe that the offerings to Makar give them speed when hunting their prey. Truly, these are a primitive people. One-armed Bolo, the halfling god of thieves. One of the most important halfling deities was Bolo, the god of thieves. Bolo was known for his cunning ways and his love of all things precious and beautiful. Legend tells that Progo, the halfling god of the storm, cut off Bolo's arm as Bolo had stolen his shadow. In retaliation, Bolo stole Progo's soul and tore it in half. Progo promptly dropped dead. Halflings used to offer rings at the altars of Bolo. Rings reminded the price that Bolo paid for his carelessness, as well as the skill he still possessed in his remaining hand. Thieves who make offerings believe that Bolo helps them to move more quietly, and helps them to open locks more skillfully. Curlin, the golden god of gnomes. Ooh, the golden god. Gnomish history is well guarded, as are their most ancient beliefs and traditions, but a visit to any gnomish household will reveal at least one of their religious traditions. One will inevitably find a golden statuette, or likeness thereof, of Curlin, the golden god. Curlin was the oldest of the gnomish pantheon, and all other gods were sprung directly from the palms of his hand. He sung the world into existence. Sound solidified into great veins of gold and silver. Curlin wanted the coins that were made of his words, so gnomish offerings were always of money. Gnomes believed that the offerings brought them luck in games of chance, as well as a shrewder eye in business dealings. The darker lesser gods. Shakar, the Orcish god of war. Shakar, the Orcish god of war, was a frightening creature, with the head of a ram, 4 arms, and the tail of a scorpion. For many years, orcs sacrificed their firstborn to Shakar, but Orcish lore says that Shakar changed his mind about the orc sacrifices when he saw that the orcs were truly warlike, and then demanded only their finest weapons as offerings. Traditionally, these were bone-handled knives and swords. Bone to represent Shakar's great horns, and tempered steel to represent his will. The orcs were very serious about their god, and they carried such weapons to remind them of his ferocity. It is said that some of the lesser barbarian tribes have taken to worshipping Shakar. It is rumoured that an altar to the god still exists in the ruins of Cree, an ancient city in the eastern region of the Morbihan Plains. Offerings made to Shakar were said to imbue the giver with unnatural willpower and prowess in battle. Torg, god of the Ogre. Ogre lore tells that Torg was the father of their children, and that long ago there were many gods to rule over the Ogrish people. As time passed, Torg saw that his children had forgotten what it meant to be Ogrish, and slew them all. From the bodies of his children, he pulled their still-beating hearts and ate them, bringing into himself all the best parts of them. To the altars of Torg, the ogres bring rubies, a symbol of the fierce heart within their god. They believe these offer increased vitality and strength of the body. Greater gods. The greater gods are classified so because they are cross-cultural. All of the races worship them in some form or another. Halcyon, the god of truth. All of the pagan religions had a notion of ultimate good, and the god Halcyon represented that good in all of them. He is best known as the god of truth, and is the child of Helion, god of light and the sun. Halcyon was said to shed light on all that was unknown, all that was petty or evil. An order of Halcyon priests, a small village in the southwestern region of the Morban Plains. Offerings made to Halcyon were always the branch of the olive tree, which are most difficult to find in light of the distinction of the forest. What was expected of the offering? Morendal, the god of shadow. Evil is an integral part in any religion. Morendal, the god of shadow, is represented one or another in all of Arcanum's pagan religions. Morendal is the bastard son of the moon and Helion, the god of light. Patricide is always associated with Morendal, as legend tells that once Helion ruled over both the day and the night, but that Morendal killed him so that the night could be his and his mother's. So the night became the kingdom of Morendal, as did the winter months. There were many secret cults and religions that worshipped Morendal, but we know little about their practices, and perhaps that is for the best. We do know that they used the black diamonds from the Bangelian deeps as offerings to their dark god. It represented loss of innocence, the triumph of the shadow. What it was expected to do, we don't know. Kaitan, the goddess of balance. Kaitan is the daughter of the moon and the sun, and so is the half-sister to both Halcyon and Morendal. Kaitan is a cunning goddess who is forever playing tricks on her two more emotional brothers, setting them against one another, and laughing when they blame the other for their problems. And she was worshipped by thieves and actors, but Kaitan was also the goddess of judges, and they would pray to her for guidance and discernment in all decisions, as well as her cunning when dealing with enemies. It was said that Kaitan knew all things, as well as she was always smiling because most things were worth nothing at all. Kaitan offered to her the geode, which represented both the beautiful and the evil in the world. What was expected of the offering was unknown. Valorian, the All-Father. Of all the pagan gods, the least is known about Valorian, or the All-Father. References to him are few and far between, but all of the religions speak of a deity who watches over all, and from whom all was created. There are two passages that refer to the All-Father by name, and both are from the Book of the 12 Powers, written by Mazarin, the elven mystic, almost 3,000 years ago. The second will be discussed later. The first says, "And the city of wonders made great offerings to the All-Father, them and gave them power, and they made things never seen before by the eyes of man." If there were offerings made to Valorian, it is unknown what they were, or what was expected of them if the offering was made. Mazarin, an expert from his Book of the 12. "And the 12 powers, they are woven together, flowing inward. The road to truth starts with wisdom, but shadow first finds purchase in the heart. The road between them is marked with stones. And the gods, they are jealous gods, and often despise one another. Greed is spit upon by love without the protection of the shadow, and this serves as a reflection of the whole. Be steadfast. 4 powers, and then a 5th. 3 5s, and then the 1. And glory to he who gains the blessing of the All-Father, who will become as a god himself." The meaning of this passage is unknown, but it would seem that Mazarin believed that all of the pagan gods were somehow intertwined. Very little research has been done concerning supposed relationships. I am often asked whether or not I have my own religious beliefs. I'll say only this: I studied the old gods extensively. even made offerings at certain altars where they are still intact. From what I've seen, I can with all verity say that these ancient beliefs are not to be trifled with. Tread lightly among them. Okay. The Orcish question. Let's begin. The Orcish question, Volume 1, a collection of speeches and letters by Hamilton Demery, Esquire. Mr. Demery is a solicitor and advisor to, and frequent spokesman for, Tarant's captains of industry. His interlocutors. Mr. Moran is an elf of high blood, and rather outspoken against the Orcs. Mr. Radcliffe is a noble from Caledon, and representative of that region's balanced views. Mr. Gustav is a half-orc labour leader from Whitehall, a recognised president to garner better wages and working conditions for the Orcs. The speech before Tarant's captains of industry, April 1884, so that would be last year. Good evening to you all, gentlemen. I hope none of you have been adversely affected by the heavy rain of the last few days. I, for one, welcome the fresh air we enjoy after a good shower. Today I wish to speak on a topic that will be of greater and greater significance in the near future, and that is Orcs. Much has been made of Orcish working and living conditions. I am not here to debate whether or not changes should be made. I am here to raise the question as to whether or not such changes would even make a difference. Orcs are a tremendously vile, violent race. They are born and bred killers, every one. Allowing them within the city limits, even as day labourers, is asking for the worst sort of trouble. Raising their appetite for violence with higher pay or better housing or less work will simply not work, as they lust for property or position as we might. They lust only for blood. We are at the dawn of a new age, an enlightened age. The wonders of technology are improving the lots of every creature, bringing wealth to those who were previously but serfs. Orcs, by their very nature, are unfit for this new age. Our society is advancing rapidly. Unless Orcs advance as well, their predilection for evil will cause great strife. I hear murmurs of concern and almost alarm from you, and I understand why. Orc labour is the backbone of many industries. Without their cheap and plentiful work, our way of life would be threatened. This, then, is the Orcish question. What are we to do? Orcs, because of their violent nature, will not fit into existing society, and yet we require their labour. We have two options, do we not? Change society to fit the Orcs, change the Orcs to fit society. As I have stated, the societal changes that have been proposed to date do not address the root cause of the problem. Improving their lot will not satisfy them as it would any other race. We either meet their need for barbarity by turning our factories into killing grounds, or we look to the other options, changing the Orcs. We must bring Orcs up to our current standard of civilization. I will be engaging in many debates and discussions over the next few months in order to determine the best way to proceed, and will address this august body once again once a working proposal has been identified. Thank you for your time. A letter to Mr. Moran, April 1884. My dear Mr. Moran, your points and concerns are well taken. In response to your musings, I must simply submit that it is our duty as enlightened and right-thinking members of our progressive society to bring civilization to all species. It does not stem from mere altruism and a deep desire to improve the situation of the less fortunate. Indeed, by spreading our mores and values to the world at large, we shall be enhancing the peace and prosperity of all races, ours included. It is our duty, I say, with great power, and certainly the technological marvels of the modern age, the abundant wealth created thereby, and the flowering of rational thought all point to power, comes great responsibility. It is our responsibility, as the most culturally and scientifically advanced peoples of Arcanum, to ensure our own future and the future of others by elevating the whole. Now, as to your question in particular, I agree that you are correct, and that this species may be completely trapped intractable and unable to advance into modern society in their present state. I suggest that these differences are purely physiological. I put forth that our remarkable scientific achievements may point to the means of solution. I propose that we begin immediate experimentation upon members of the Orcish race to ascertain the cause of their violent inclinations in the hopes of finding a medical remedy. Dear Lord. A simple operation, the removal of a malignant gland perhaps, may be all that is needed to bring individual members of this unfortunate race into an enlightened and more state. A breeding program might even reveal that such beneficial modifications are hereditary. Regards, Hamilton Denry, Esquire. Jaina, can you believe this? I don't suppose any of you are on board with this? Well, How does Gar sound?
Yes, sir. What would you have me do?
Well, sir, I personally feel that the lesser races could indeed be improved by surgery. Oh, shut up, Gar. Ugh. What is it? Drivel. A letter to Mr. Radcliffe, May 1884. My dear Mr. Radcliffe, you speak of the realm of the gods and of natural selection. Both of these terms help us to explain and comprehend our helpless past. But what, I ask you, of the boundless future? The gods made the world and us. We are remaking this world. Why not remake ourselves as well? The era of rational and scientific thought is upon us. Let us not go backwards to our dark, superstitious past. Let us move boldly into the future. Natural selection, in theory, helps us to explain why dwarves are short and well suited to mining, and why orcs are strong, vicious warriors, and why elves are well adapted to natural surroundings. It need not be a rallying point for those who are too timid to seize the future. Let us explain the past, but let it not hold us in stupefied awe of nature when we have the means, the knowledge, and the wherewithal to define for ourselves what tomorrow shall bring. I foresee the day when we shall engineer magnificent edifices that reach to the very heavens, when we shall launch fleets of unsinkable ships, when we shall live free of disease, when the vast network of our rail lines brings peace and prosperity to every corner of Arcanum. Every day, ingenuity and necessity meet to create new and greater technological wonders. Advancement in medicine and engineering, and indeed every branch of knowledge, bring prosperity to all. If orcs do not fit into this brave new world, bad hand natural selection has dealt them, then why not seek a medical solution? Why wait for natural selection to provide us with an orc that better fits our enlightened society? For their benefit and ours, we should act now. For all we know, the course of your precious natural selection would be to wipe orcs from all existence. I ask you to explain how natural genocide could be more humane than my proposed solution. Now, as never before, we not only understand our world, but are capable of making great changes thereto. We have the power, the right, and the obligation to use this capability to bring peace and prosperity to Arcanum. Let us see if we can do better by the orcs than nature has. Let us solve the orcish question, and then move on to bigger and better things. A new era dawns. We are no longer subject to the whims of nature and of the gods. Let us take our future into our own hands and see what we can make of it. Let us step boldly into this brave new world. Regards, Hamilton, Esquire. A letter to Mr. Morat, July 1884. My dear Mr. Morat, I am not ignorant of the marvels of magecraft. I have even been witness to the miracle of a resurrection. I do not doubt the utility of powerful magic. I do, however, doubt the ability of magic to survive against the rising tide of technology. The common man can easily use and benefit from technology, but this is not true of magic. That is magic's restriction and will be its downfall. I would not wish all magic removed from existence. Perhaps Tula or Kintara will remain more or less in their current state, but such is hard to predict. As to the Orcish question, I shall gladly lock sabres with you in a friendly debate. You mentioned social and cultural influences and accuse me of only considering the physiological in my proposed solution. Well, perhaps this is true, but if so, it is because the social and cultural influences are the solution. I say so because the Orcs' social and cultural history are at odds with the direction that Tarant's culture and society are headed. Such is exactly the cause of this ongoing debate. Perhaps there are social and cultural changes that can take place on both sides to ease the pressure, but I do not foresee these to be easy changes either. The physiological solution? Your argument that the potential abuse of these techniques is specious. The same can be said for any form of power, from magic to mere brute force. The responsibility lies with those wielding the power to use it for the common good, and always will. To ensure that we are speaking in the same way, let me here attempt to define the Orcish question. We need to agree upon the following statements before we can proceed. Orcs are, on the whole, foul-tempered and of a violent nature. The rapid technological advancement that Tarant is experiencing has created a new social order. Within this new social order, the races of Arcanum have aligned more or less to the best of their ability. Orcs are at the bottom of this new social order, and unhappy with their lot, and in accordance to their very nature, may resort to violence if not forestall. The Orcish question then is, how do we resolve this potentially violent situation? Some have suggested packing them all off. This does not strike me as the best solution, simply because it would deprive the Orcs of the opportunity which we all enjoy in this new enlightened society of advancing to the best of our abilities. If this is debatable, so be it. I do not think the Orcs would voluntarily stay in Tarant if such advancement weren't possible. Furthermore, the labour provided by the Orcs is essential to Tarant's economy. This is truly a short-sighted solution. Some suggest working with the captains of industry to bring about better working conditions and better opportunities for advancement. This is well and good, but however, I am extremely sceptical that the true Orcish nature will be so easily modified. Some suggest letting natural selection have its way, leaving the Orcs to their own devices to resolve the situation. I fear this could have nothing but a violent outcome. I reject this idea as being irresponsible. If we can do something, we should. My proposal is to seek a technological solution. Medicine and anatomy may show us a way to relieve the Orcs of their violent nature. This violent nature no longer benefits them or us. To engage in such a program of alteration would incur the changes that natural selection would eventually bring about, quickly and painlessly. For no doubt, the violent nature of the Orcs is a needless vestige from a less civilized age. Bear in mind that I am not recommending this course of action in order that a race be moulded into some image that I whimsically desire. If Orcs are to thrive in the modern world, such changes must take place. If technology can bring them about more rapidly, I say let us not delay. As for the practical implementation of such a program, I would suggest, if experimentation shows it's possible, that we begin with volunteers. Surely the most intelligent Orcs can be persuaded with logic and reason that they and their descendants will only benefit from pacification. If the alterations are hereditary, the fierce, violent Orc may well be a thing only found in histories and storybooks, and the world a better and less volatile place. Regards, Hamilton Demery, Esquire. Well, I don't know about you, but I personally feel like hunting down this Hamilton Demery, Esquire, and murdering him violently. I know it conforms to the whole Orcish stereotype, but isn't the Orc in me wanting? It's the gentleman in me wanting to murder a man I find personally reprehensible. I'm sure you understand. The Orcish Question, Volume 2, a collection of speeches and letters by Hamilton Demery, Esquire. Mr. Demery is a solicitor and advisor to, and frequent spokesman for, Tarant's Captains of Industry. A speech before Tarant's Captains of Industry, July 1884. I shall come straight to the point. Well, you took bloody well long enough, didn't you? My debates have clarified certain issues, and there is also some recent news that has a significant impact on my proposals. Mr. John Beddoes' treatise on orcs has recently come to my attention. If orcs are, as he postulates, the result of sorcerous meddling with humans, then this casts a new light on things. Let us proceed under the assumption that the famed naturalist is correct. Many have been recently arguing the concept of nature versus nurture, whether traits and behaviours are learned or inbred. Since orcs were humans who've been modified, then I would point out that this argues strongly in favour of their behaviours being inextricably part of their being. Who or whatever did this, did so for a reason. That reason was to create, we may assume from the evidence, a race of strong, virulent, violent, vicious warriors. That they have succeeded admirably we can have no doubt. If any significant number of orcs could defeat this violent nature and join our enlightened society as reasonable beings, then their creator would have failed. I say again, orcs have been created to be mean and violent. One or two here or there may well be capable of advancing, but as a race, such a thing is to be regarded in the highest suspicion. Now to the crux of my argument. What magic has done, that is, turned humans into base creatures of violence, let technology undo. Why let these poor folk continue to be out of place in modern society because of the whim of some ancient sorcerer? We can rebuild them. We have the technology. We have the ability to create the world's first pacified orc. We can bring these poor lost souls back into society's bosom. Let us do so. I propose immediately beginning experimentation upon dead orcs. Plenty can be had. Furthermore, I take as well. These subjects can come as volunteers from those currently sitting condemned in the dungeons of the Court of the Executioners. Thank you for your time. A letter to Mr. Moran, August 1884. Dear Mr. Moran, to respond to your earlier point, you claim that technologically altering the orcs to a better disposition would be unjust. In light of Beddoes' treatise, I disagree. It would be very just to undo what has been done to them. You also propose the possibility of altering those who hate orcs so that they no longer do so. If orcs were not hated and feared for good reason, I would have no problem with this. I think the problem of hatred and even prejudice will go away over time once technology has presented us with an orc that is no longer predisposed to the behaviours that induce them. You claim that I would take away that which makes them unique and leave them defenceless. If that uniqueness is an unnatural predilection for violence, then yes! But I only seek to remove that which impels them to unnatural levels of violence, not to destroy their sense of self-preservation. Regards, Hamilton Demry, Esquire. A letter to Mr. Gustave, 1884. Dear Mr. Gustave, I fear you are in the minority in representing your race. But not so. Folk of your temperament can be reasoned with. You speak of violence, and clearly not without cause. That violence may be necessary, but only as a last resort. I beg you to consider my plea and report to the eugenics laboratories as a test subject for the medical experimentation that could loosen the chains that have held your people since they were created by foul magic so long ago. Sincerely, Hamilton Demry, Esquire. You know what? Yeah, I'm willing to abandon this whole quest, hunt down Mr. Hamilton Demry, Esquire, and torture him for days before killing him. A letter to Mr. Moran, September 1884. My dear Mr. Moran, you claim my proposal is unethical. How so? These poor orcs have a magical poison coursing through their veins that makes them a threat to everyone, including themselves. As civilization expands and advances, the orc threat grows also. I merely propose an antidote. If a magical antidote were offered, I would be in full support. I doubt any mage existing today has the power to undo what has been done. Technology, however, may hold the answer. I believe we are obligated, as right-thinking persons, to discover whether or not it does. How, pray tell, is that unethical? Regards, Hamilton Demry, Esquire. A letter to Mr. Gustave, September 1884. Dear Mr. Gustav, yes, I wish to use our marvellous technological know-how to change the orcs. Let us make that abundantly clear. Let us also make it clear that I am most certainly not proposing that we make orcs our willing slaves. I do wish people would stop making assumptions. Orcs, by design, are inordinately predisposed to violence. This predisposition makes their presence in a modern, civilized society a problematic one. I propose a technological solution to the problem. Remove the inordinate predisposition to violence. Now, you claim that your hatred was learned. No doubt you have been treated poorly, but as a race, sir, the orcs deserve no less. As harsh a statement as that is, I simply point to Mr. Beddoes' treatment as justification for it. Any race that practices wholesale cannibalism deserves little in the way of compassion. My solution is exceedingly generous. If we remove the barbaric tendencies which so separate orcs from the rest of civilized society, then we may be able to effect a peaceful end to that separation. Please, let us speak no more of bloodshed and wrath. It is unlike gentlemen to do so, and in so doing you only make yourself seem more brutish and in need of the alterations you would resist. Sincerely, Hamilton Derry, Esquire. Actually, I think we should probably find Mr. Gustav and have him help us torture and murder this man. I think that would be a fine idea. Oh. Things a little bit more. Looks like we're into the fiction section. Excellent. Something a little bit less violently frustrating. Would be nice, wouldn't it? The nature of archaeological practice. Being the introductory volume to the third year's fieldwork in the southeastern district, and musings as to the classification of archaeological practice as science or art, by Elias Thorne, Director of Excavation, and published under the auspices of the Secretary-General of the Archaeological Survey of Arcanum. How far we have come! There are few things which appear to us at this present day so strange as the work of past scholars. Conversely, there are few things as edifying as examining the progress we have recently made, even in our understanding of even the most remote and ancient of times. When I think of the scholastic work that was being done not 5 decades ago, even by such noted luminaries as Robert de Carolis or Agnes Festal, I marvel at the strides we have taken since their time. Think of the system proposed by de Carolis for cataloguing archaeological finds, whose categories seem so backward and arbitrary to the modern mind. Criteria as disparate as an object's colour, its use in agriculture, degree of preservation, whether it contained writing, and suitability for display were all to be considered equal in his schema. And while admittedly all of these factors are important to some degree, I need not remind the gentle reader that it is a sign of faulty method to heap such diverse elements together into a single rubric. We need only compare these old ways with the modern techniques of comparative stylistic analysis, and the systematic techniques now employed to establish relative chronologies in order to feel a, not undeserved, sense of pride. However, lest I be accused of thoughtlessly attacking our forebears, let me qualify some of my previous and somewhat unguarded statements. For all of their apparent errors or fruitless theorems, those past academicians are the giants upon whose shoulders we now stand. In their own day, these great thinkers launched our discipline as a formal area of study, and called into question the plundering and looting of ancient sites that had been praised as heroic for centuries. I shudder when I think of the damage these self-serving, albeit adventurous, treasure hunters inflicted upon the material records at so many of Arcanum's greatest ancient sites. These quests were little more than self-indulgent vandalism perpetuated in the name of personal gain and notoriety. Our diligent predecessors crusaded to raise civic awareness about the precious nature of Arcanum's early sites, and inspired a zeal for understanding the past that drives us still. So, although we may gently correct the imperfections of those archaeologists who have gone before us, we also remain securely in their debt. Thus, having come to terms with the triumphs and shortcomings of the past, I would turn now to the fractious divisions that confront all of us in the present. We are in no position to rest upon our laurels, and must address the recent debates and quarrels that have beset our forum of academic discourse. I refer, of course, to the preface for last year's publication in the same series of fieldwork reports. In that excellent volume, my esteemed colleague Leela Margolis-Sen, perhaps inadvisedly, suggested that recent developments in the practice of archaeology were due solely to the efforts of those who favour the technological sciences. And, as no doubt the reader is aware, she goes on to claim that the archaeology, as a field of study, should be considered a school of science in itself. As if practitioners of technology alone can lay claim to rational thought and logical analysis. Colleagues, what do such inflammatory claims gain for us in our study of the past? What do they accomplish except to distract us with constant infighting and needless dissension? I urge you to set aside your differences in method and recognise the contributions of all individuals dedicated to furthering our knowledge of the past. I will be among the first to laud Ms. Margolis-Sen for her subaqueous steam pump and the automated sluicing gate, which have revolutionised the practice of excavation in bogs and other sites previously inaccessible due to high water tables. But I would also claim some small measure of credit for myself in assisting her digs through my judicious application of divinatory incantations designed to determine the nature of particularly troublesome and perplexing pottery shards. Which of us can fail to compliment the work of Phineas Lightfoot, whose command of the art has allowed him to coax secrets out of the ground itself? I am speaking, of course, of his talent in the earthly arts, which have allowed him to locate rich sites for excavation that have lain hidden to the naked eye for centuries. Can we quantify such contributions? Do not all these efforts guide us forwards towards our goal of understanding the past? Even had I the power, I would be loath to eradicate the contributions of any scholar who has contributed even one faltering step in our collective journey towards knowledge. In short, I urge us all to set aside our differences as best we can, for although we may differ in our approach, we are all ultimately seeking the truth. Therefore, it is a spirit of reconciliation that I present this humble work. This introductory volume will be followed within a year by an extensive second volume, detailing the results of this year's excavations, along with some observations and preliminary discussions. Together with the second volume, a slender third and final volume will be printed. This work will primarily contain the maps and figure relevant to discussion as set forth in my previous work. It is my sincerest hope that they may offer some measure of the truth we all seek. Let's get a brief glass of water and then continue.
I'll do it right away.
No. Times of one Ashton Fernwelter. I've chosen to chronicle my life now for the very simple reason that I may no longer be alive, and I have survived all others who might share my tale. Outside this room, the sun sets. I can see it through the window. In the morning, my will shall be tested once more, and possibly for the last time. I would not take part in such dramatics if I did not believe in the inevitability of my demise. But time grows short, and does not allow for the ramblings of a doomed man. Please take it upon yourself to read the following in your time, as I take it upon myself to finish this narrative in my time, and through that bridge my life may find its true meaning. My beginnings were as unpleasant and dirty as 1,000,000 other urchins crawling along the bottoms of Tarant, and yet somehow special. My father did not exist, my mother had never mentioned him. I had never seen him, and all those put to the question would not even repeat the rumours they had heard concerning him. My mother, dear lady, was like no other. In all my travels, amongst all the people that I have met, I have known no one so as determined or with such grace of willpower as my mother. Her loyalty and concern for her only son was matched only by the tenacity with which she approached the rest of her life. One who imparted to me the importance of education, honour, and above all, truth. Needless to say, my world crumbled at the age of 10 when she was murdered. At that time I had no idea of her death, she had simply disappeared. It would not be long before life led me in the direction of her true fate, however, and not long until I found out what it was that separated me from those 1,000,000 others I had grown up with on the diseased streets of Tarant. Shortly after my mother's disappearance, and after a 2-week stay at the home of an uncle, I was apprenticed at a nearby factory. Apprenticed was the word that appeared on the official papers concerning my sale into slavery by my uncle. Had my mother the opportunity, I'm sure she would have wreaked revenge upon the man. In the end, she may have, for his end was a gruesome one. My apprenticeship amounted to performing all the menial tasks that required a body smaller than those of the average factory worker. When jammed with a chunk of slag, it was my duty to dislodge the offending article. In the larger machines, the jams could occur deep within the bowels of interlocking gears and cogs. Of errors were the bane of my young existence. From my first day inside the factory, I discovered I loathed machines. The thought of travelling within one to effect repairs never ceased to make me sick. There was one such jam that occurred not 2 weeks after my inception into the factory. I was called away from sweeping up still burning flakes of metal spewed by one machine outside of the factory to a jam which, as the supervisor, must have been obstructing the operation of a crucial piece of machinery. By the time I had arrived at a panel near the base of the machine, a panel near the base of the machine had been removed, and was apparently the entrance I was to use to find and clear the obstruction. On hands and knees I reluctantly crawled into the belly of the beast, at the unkind insistence of the supervisor. I hated him as much as the oily mechanisms he presided over. I shuddered at the machine. This was the smallest space I had ever been in. The metal that entombed me sent shivers down my spine by virtue of its sheer metallicness. Overhead, gears interlocked, and had the machine been operational, I would have been assured of death with any of their surfaces. All around me, oil dripped in dirty rivulets down to the floor, where they gathered in puddles. I slogged along, soaking my clothes in oil, but I could not find the source of the obstruction. The thick odour of bare metal assaulted me as I crept along, making me dizzy and physically nauseous. Then, past many gears, hoses, and metallic pumps and regulators that I could only guess the function of, I found the source of the problem. A nest of sorts was formed in front of me of metal strands, crisscrossed seemingly haphazardly. From this nest came hoses of every length and thickness, many of which were dripping their contents through visible leaks in the line. Above the nest was one giant gear, from which many others removed to receive their motion. I assumed the nest was concerned with driving the central wheel, although how this could be accomplished was a mystery to me. The problem appeared to lie within the large gear above the nest. The bracket that held a hose was lying on the floor, while the hose itself had swung into the path of the gear, where it was now bound between the large gear and one of the smaller feeder gears. How the gears had not simply cut through the hose I could not ascertain, but there was no fluid seeping from the affected hose, so it appeared as though it might be able to continue its original function. Of course, the hose could not work, nor could I retreat from the metal tube before I had alleviated the jam. Mustering what courage I could, I willed myself to reach forward and pull the hose out of the gears. That is when it happened for the first time, there, in the mechanical heart of the largest machine in the factory. As I reached forward to take hold of the hose, the gears began shifting on their axis, and the hoses and wires made slight retreats from my outstretched hand. I convinced myself I was only imagining things, and continued to reach for the offending hose. When my flesh came into contact with the metallic sheathing of the hose, the entire machine retched. The gears no longer shifted on their axis, but began to quake violently. Bolts and screws securing lines began to slip in their shafts, and separated themselves from their points of attachment. The machine had been shut down before I was called in, but now as I stood in fear, clutching the shaking hose lodged between the gears, the beast rumbled once, twice, and then gave a tremendous shudder. With that shudder came the surprise ejection of the line I was holding. As it recoiled, it hit me in the face with enough force to throw me away from the now vibrating nest of cables. The large gear let out a sickly grind at the same moment it threw back the hose, and spun wildly. A sudden pain brought my attention to my wrist. A perfect rectangle of red now occupied the area below my hand, and in the moments before the blood got to the surface, I could see the bloodlines that normally resided beneath the wrist unscathed, but open to the air. Apparently, when the great gear resumed its duty, it caught that rectangle of my flesh and took it to itself. Had the line not thrown me backwards, the rest of my body would have joined it in the spinning gears. Now the machine was alive around me. A deep, penetrating hum permeated the air, and the rotating gears warned against the slightest misstep. I quickly turned and made my way back to the opening, carrying my wounded wrist. The opening I had entered through was in my sight when something grabbed me from behind and I fell to the ground. A slow-moving gear had caught the hem of my oil-soaked tunic and was pulling me towards it. Striking out in panic, my hand found purchase on a shaft in front of me, and I pulled with all my strength, attempting to free myself from the gear's grasp. With a rip, the gear finally let go, contented with the large part of my tunic it had ripped away. Short-breathed and white-faced, I staggered towards the opening. When I reached the panel and crawled outside, I was greeted with a swift cuff by the supervisor that sent me sprawling back to the ground. "Damn it, boy! You weren't supposed to turn it on! What do you think you're doing?" bellowed the supervisor. This first outburst was followed by another fist to the back of my head. "Chief, the machine, she's working. He did it all right. We can get back on schedule now. We'll make the ship, Chief." The space engineer had interrupted the supervisor's office now. Being a boy of 10, I did not question the supervisor's order, but quickly ran to his office. As was my apprenticeship a misnomer, so was the supervisor's office. Through the rear of the factory, down 2 long corridors, and beyond 3 doors, one finally came to a small, bare room. Lined with rotting planks, the room had a very disagreeable the same odour that hung about the supervisor. Another rotting wood formation served as the desk, and scattered about the floor were remains of food and other things which I dared not consider the identity of. I put myself in one of the cleaner corners and sat down to wait for the supervisor to arrive. I looked at my wrist. It was surprisingly clean. What blood had come to the surface had stayed within the area of the wound, and had made a light scab already. Near the edges of the rectangle, tinges of pink skin could be seen creeping back under the scab. I was arrested from my inspection by the opening of the door into the room. The supervisor stormed in, slamming the door behind him, and he sat down at his desk in a flurry. The rot of wood shuddered, but it seemed to hold his weight. I remember being disappointed at that fact. He was a large man, a human to be sure, but vertically a large man, as well as horizontally. He thrived on using his stature to intimidate those around him, which was one of the reasons I loathed him. He did not keep a beard, although I doubt he could have, had he chosen to. The hair on his head was wispy at best, although he tended to comb it such that it appeared larger than it was. His clothes, a simple though ill-fitting cotton shirt, and leather breeches in danger of losing their ability to encompass the man at any moment, were perpetually covered in stains and offal, not only from the factory, but from his exceedingly poor personal habits. "You little puke! Where'd you get a expensive machinery? And you go running round inside playing like you're a damned hawk in a meat locker?" Came my abashed response. Even now, so many years later, I can find no positive side to this man, or pity for his eventual fate. "Boy, you might have just broke that machine out there. It works right now, but in the morning, who knows? If that machine don't work, boy, I lose my job." "I don't like not having a job." A snarl crept into his voice. "Ever since you got here, things have been breaking. Things I gotta answer for." I took a step backwards. My breath caught in my throat. The air felt thick. "I don't plan to go losing my job on account of some scrub kid." It became harder and harder for me to breathe. The air was so thick. "Boy, you know what this is?" He pulled open a desk drawer and produced a metallic instrument. He held the low end, wrapping his hand around a wooded portion, and looked over the tube that extended from a rough cylinder. "No, sir." "It's a gun." I hate that word. "Now, I have an agreement with your uncle, boy. I can't just toss you out. Not while you're breathing, anyway." My vision began to dim as I struggled to take in the thickening air. through a haze, I saw a twisted grin split the supervisor's face, and the barrel of the gun swung my direction. Then my breath failed me. I could no longer inhale. The supervisor looked as though he felt it too. His rant, to which I had been listening less and less, ceased, and the only sounds that emanated from his direction were inarticulate gurgles. His gun had lowered as well, forgotten now. The air continued to thicken, and took on a dark blue hue. "You!" gasped the supervisor, in my direction. "This is your—" He ceased his attempt to accuse me, and raised the gun to do his talking. Oh. Classic bit of, let's say, like, almost like a vaudeville novel. The Hunters Hunted by Eli Basquiat. Well, by Eli Basquiat. When I approached Vermilion Station, my case full of schematics, I paused briefly, as I have many times since first coming to the city of Tarant 5 years ago. I have never ceased to appreciate its size and splendour. Grinning mildly, I moved to enter the station, passing through its courtyard and fountains. I had to remind myself not to loiter about the beauty of Vermilion statuary, for I had a train to catch, and not more than minutes until it arrived. Passing through the doors of the great station, I became aware of a disturbance behind me. A man, dressed in an ill-fitting jacket of which the sleeves had been cut, was running through the courtyard, waving his arms about and causing a scene. As the man approached, short of breath, it became apparent that I was the object of his exertions. "Excuse me," the man puffed out, leaning over and clasping his knees. "Been chasing you through the whole bloody city." "Chasing me?" I asked, shocked. What had I done to earn the attention of this ruffian? "Yes," he said, huffing and coughing for a final time before straightening up. "Been chasing you. I notice you're a practitioner in the devices of technology, is it?" I was taken aback as to how this complete stranger knew of my background in the field of technology. I replied simply, "Yes, this is correct." He smiled a smile as broad as his face, until I was sure his skin would split. "Good, good," he said, clearly pleased. "So you work with gunsmithing, explosives and the like?" "No," I replied in truth, for in truth I had very little experience in those fields of study. "What?" the man said darkly, no longer as pleased. "You study technology, don't you? What do you know about them?" "Therapeutics," I replied. "Discovering the effects of new substances we can create." "Like gunpowder, maybe?" the man asked, his mood starting to lighten. "Well, no, actually," I was forced to admit. "That would be more in the field of chemistry, which I have dabbled in as well." The man's face lit up again, and he turned his head and asked, "Will they do?" I suddenly became aware of two others who had approached me from behind, standing silently during the exchange. As I whirled to regard them, I realised from their sloping brows and jutting jaws that I faced half-orcs. One of them nodded. "Yeah, they'll do. Now come on, eh? Barmer's already on the train. Hurry up and get him loaded." "Train? What train?" "I have a destination of my own, and I can assure you, chaps, that it is not the same as yours." "It is now," the other half-orc said. "Now come on, Professor, before we have to get rough with you. We promise we won't take up more than a week of your time. All we want is your professional opinion on something." He grabbed one of my shoulders and began to push me towards the train, while the other half-orcs and did the same. I realised I should play along with these miscreants, while they seemed to offer me no real harm. "Very well," I said. "Where are we going?" "Stillwater," the first half-orc replied. During the train ride, I was able to learn about my companions. The two half-orcs were Wilhelm and his older brother, Klaus. They were loud and boisterous companions, possessed of great physical strength. Baumer was an immense half-ogre of middling intellect, barely able to perform coherent sentences. The brothers spoke little of his background, only that they had found him hiding out in an abandoned farmhouse. The human member of their group who had stopped me in Tarant was Jacob. He spoke little during our trip, preferring to let the brothers do all the talking. Not one of them would tell me their purpose, nor the reason for my going with them. Instead, they seemed to argue only about irrelevant things. They were silent now, though, as we disembarked near Stillwater to finish travelling by wagon. Stillwater was as still as its name implied. It contained none of the loud, noisy bustle of Tarant, a growing and advancing city. Nothing suggested that this was the town where Gilbert Bates had first constructed his steam engine that had so shocked the magical community. Ah. The streets were mostly empty. I spotted a dwarf making his way through the town, doubtless travelling here from the Grey Mountains to trade for food and other sundries. There was a shopkeeper shoveling the snow from in front of his shop, and there was one fellow lurking near the entrance to town that seemed to me to be up to no good. He stared long at our company, especially Balmer, with an unpleasant smile on his face. Then Wilhelm drew something long and thin out of his coat, which blocked my view. Whatever he brandished, it made the bounty hunter hurry on his way. I turned to Wilhelm as Jacob entered the hotel to procure rooms. Now may I know why my presence is needed here, or what the purpose of this trip to Stillwater is? We're hunting, said the half-orc replied. Yeah, hunting. The lower and slower voice of Balmer, riding in the back of the wagon behind us. Hunting? I asked. Which makes you bounty hunters? Wilhelm seemed to dislike that term, but nodded reluctantly. In a sense, we like to think of ourselves as hunters of occult beasts and villainous monsters. We kill weirs, Balmer offered. Does he mean werewolves? I asked after a long, confused pause. Aye, werewolves, and other less famous types of creatures, Wilhelm replied, tapping the side of his slightly upturned nose. But we fight other beasties too. We've gotten our share of mad animals, and even a few things that curdle your blood to tell you about them. Oh really? I said, not quite sure this ragtag band could bring down anything larger than a sheep. And what are you hunting here? Wilhelm gave me a surprised look. Guess you've never heard of the Stillwater Giant. It's an old tavern tale here, but Jacob believes there's more to it. He wants to kill it. Frankly, I do too, on account of the damn thing being known to eat orcs. A giant? I exclaimed. I'd thought they were all long extinct. What good am I against a giant? Wilhelm looked sheepish and cast his eyes to the ground. Well, we use a lot of technological things in our line of work, mostly guns and such. Trouble is, in our last hunt, old Klaus over here had a slight accident, and now most of the equipment is... That's enough! Klaus roared from in front of us. Needless to say, Wilhelm whispered, we need you to fix some things. At this point, Jacob returned from inside of the hotel. We're all set. Everyone come inside. And Balmer... The half-orc slowly turned his shaggy head to regard Jacob. Try to be quiet on your way in. I may not have quite let on that we have a half-ogre with us. I studied their equipment that night, and as expected, their things were not in my area of expertise. Combined, they had 6 types of guns, ranging from heavy pistol to some sort of type of gigantic repeating rifle that I could only assume was Balmer's. 3 of the guns were damaged, and all of their arms were running low on ammunition. The ammunition was easily restored, for I did have some degree of explosives and chemicals with me, and their group had excess supplies with which to make the ammunition. As for the weapons themselves, I did my best. It appeared that they all had misfired due to a lack of repair. I'd used what little knowledge I had to try and fix their triggering mechanisms and repair some of the more grievous burn damage. I only hoped that my meagre repairs would be enough for what this group needed. In the morning, Jacob awoke us all. Each of their group was given a pack of provisions, as well as a gun. True to my expectations, Balmer got the big one. The 2 brothers also carried additional pistols. You're coming too, Jacob said, referring to me, just to make sure you made proper repairs. That's all right, I said, only slightly annoyed. I might as well see this adventure through. That's the spirit, I heard Jacob mutter, as we began our trek into the mountains. We had all been dressed in greatcoats to protect us for the cold, save Balmer, who seemed comfortable no matter the climb. We rose into the hilllands that day, and the day following. We ate the packed provisions, and I struggled with the labours, for my body was not used to such strenuous activity. On the 3rd day, we were well into the snowy regions of the mountains. We reached a smoother region of the rocks and snow, where Jacob said we were to make camp. The group did this with their practiced efficiency, quickly setting up tents and assigning watch duty. As I lay in my bed that third night, it was hard to get sleep due to the mountain air. Whatever rest I would have gotten was shattered as a loud, braying, inhuman cry echoed through the still mountain air. I know not what made the cry, and to think of it still terrifies me to this day. The camp scrambled into motion at once. Baumer stormed out of his tent in full gear, while Klaus, who was standing watch, was already prepared. Jacob and Wilhelm soon followed suit. "It came from there," Klaus said, pointing out off into the night. I myself had been unable to discern a direction for the cry might have erupted from, but it seemed to originate out of the thin night air itself. They set off into the dark, and I followed, not wishing to be left behind. They moved over the sharp and treacherous rocks until Baumer held up his hand for them to stop. His ogre senses had smelled something. They all clutched their firearms tighter. Then something bright flashed furiously and explosively behind us. Wilhelm, who had been bringing up the rear, was thrown screaming against some of the more jagged rocks that littered the ground. I threw myself to my feet as the survivors wheeled and discharged their weapons into the night. It was horribly loud, and I was almost frightened enough to cry. I was unable to move as their weapons thundered, especially Baumer's repeating gun, which clamoured like the horrible clattering of a demon. Spent ammunition shells clanked as they reached the ground. Then all was quiet. They paused, and Klaus went to inspect his brother, while Jacob moved to check the area of night behind us. "He's burned to death," Klaus said quietly. "Giants don't burn people. What manner of monster really lurks up here?" He stood and announced, his voice wavering slightly. "We have to move on. Jacob and Baumer switch places." Baumer trundled over to where Jacob had been exploring, but from Jacob there was no response. "He's gone," Baumer said, confused. Something that might have been fear flooded Klaus's eyes, but it left quickly. "We're leaving him. Come on." It was almost too much to get to my feet and continue, but I did. We continued going further into the dark, and I was sure we were lost. And then Baumer began to fire madly into the air. As I watched, something in the night shook him and threw him out of our light. Klaus sprang forward and fired his own weapon, which clicked as it jammed. Apparently my repairs had not been so good as I would have thought. Meanwhile, Baumer's shots had faded, and his gun had been silenced. Klaus roared with frustration and fired his pistol above his head, all of his composure lost. "Come and get me! Come on out, you burning thing!" His gun fired into the air, and as I watched, to my horror, the bullets seemed to wobble and slow in the air. Only one thing destroyed the trajectories of bullets like that: a strong magic field. Something up here was very destructive and very magical. I did not wish to see what it was, and I fled blindly into the night. I heard all of Klaus's shouts until they culminated in one final scream. As I fled, though, I passed our campfire, its fire almost burned out. In the distant shadows that it cast, I could have sworn to see some enormous hairy creatures edging its massive body into the light. But when I looked again, it was gone. I forced myself to believe that it was the illusion caused by the speed of my flight and the flickering of the dying campfire. When I returned to town, I took whatever money I could find that the group had left in its rooms back at the Stillwater Hotel. Doubtless they had expected to return triumphant and spend more days in the town as heroes. I planned to take the wagon and return to the train, where I could return to my beloved Tarant, so far away from these accursed mountains. As the wagon slowly pulled away from town, I saw the bounty hunter who had grinned at the wagon on our first day here. He was conversing with another man, dressed only in light cloths, who wore a wide-brimmed, floppy hat. As he talked, I saw him open a pouch and draw out a severed ear. A half-ogre ear, I realised coldly. He then produced two more ears, smaller and less pointed. He handed the bounty hunter a large repeating gun that could only have been Baumer's. As the wagon moved by them, I overheard him speak. "That took care of that band of 3 half-men right for you. The newfangled technology was no match for good old-fashioned magic. They even salvaged their arms, just as you asked. Now, As to my payment? The wagon pulled out of earshot, and it began to... The two men cursed and returned to the tavern to discuss their vile business. It had been a mage, I thought, as the rain fell upon my head. A mage with illusions, fire, force, and other enchantments. But no magic I knew could replicate the sound I had heard. And what had I almost seen in the dying firelight of our deserted camp? Why weren't there 4 ears? What had taken Jacob then? All I know is that there is definitely something lurking in those tall, snow-covered mountains above Stillwater, and it chills my blood to think of it. There are a lot of books left to read, and frankly, my voice is getting a little bit... my throat's getting a little bit hoarse from all of this reading. So, I think we're going to call the end of this appendix. We may return to Tarant's library for another... might read that, and then we'll call it. But after that, I think we may return another time for more reading through Tarant Library. Okay, just this then. Geographical and Magical Properties of the Isle of Despair. A Brief History of the Dreaded Penal Colony by Sir Isaac Thrush, Esquire. The Isle of Despair, an overview. It has long been debated as to who first discovered the peculiar properties of the Isle of Despair, and how it came to be used as a prison colony. There are historians who attribute this discovery to the first master of mages of Tula, others who believe the elves found it during their journeys before their eventual building of Kantara. In any case, it is well documented that the Isle of Despair has housed Arcanum's more diabolical social element for well over 400 years, and that it is a perfect environment for that element due to both its geographical and magical properties. Geographically, the Isle of Despair is perfect for housing criminals and derelicts. Being that it is surrounded by water, with the nearest coast almost 1,000 miles to the east, there is little danger of its inhabitants swimming to the mainland. The isle itself is situated between 3 strong ocean subcurrents. Consequently, the waters around the island are invariably rough, and violently crash upon the rocky shore both night and day. Massive whirlpools are known to appear suddenly and without warning. There is an account of 3 Ashburian merchant ships being swallowed by one of these very whirlpools in 1783. But it is not only the geographical characteristics of the island that make it the perfect prison. Inexplicably, the island seems to negate certain types of magical practices, but most importantly, those of the Conveyance College. Mages find it impossible to transport themselves from the island's surface to the mainland. Various theories have been postulated concerning this phenomenon. Some scientists believe that the island itself sits upon a massive vein of mithril ore. Mithril, having the ability to harbour magical flows, might just be the cause behind this most curious distortion. Archaeologists have theorised that the Isle of Despair might once have harboured an ancient civilization that used an early form of technology, and that old ruins might exist behind the island's surface to verify that fact. Both theories might be scientifically sound, but none has yet been proven. Regardless, the Isle of Despair will continue to harbour our social convicts until the day comes when its vagaries are no longer sufficient, or until we, as a society, no longer have the need for it. Time, I think, to go visit Gilbert Bates.